a lot of people asked me if I was afraid going in there, and I really was not afraid of Gacy. And I had read a lot about him over the years before I was even hired. And I knew that he was what we call an organized serial killer, which means that he planned his attack, he planned his victims, he planned what he was going to do, and then he executed on them. And he wasn't what we call like an out of control, disorganized killer who would kill on a whim. Or that would be immediately violent for no good reason. He was a predator. So, first of all, I wasn't his type. And second of all, I knew that he needed me and he was going to manipulate me because that's what sociopaths do. And that I was not a person I was not endangered because of him.
Welcome back. We are on today with my guest, Karen Conti, on the Tour for the Shit podcast. I'm your host, Angie Sorensen. Thank you so much for tuning in. So the interview is based on Karen's book, which I read cover to cover, and it's about it starts off about the time when she spent 7 months as part of the legal team representing a serial killer, John Wayne Gacy, in his final death row appeals. So it is a time that defined her professional trajectory. And so we discuss all kinds of aspects from her book. She had to face a lot of public scrutiny, obviously, from representing someone like John Wayne Gacy. And we talk also about, the death penalty, because this is something that she stands very strongly. She stands against very strongly. And so, yeah, it's a really, really interesting conversation that I'm having with her. And her book, when I read it, it actually really shocked me how it moved me and how it sort of transformed some of the triggers that I have, which I think, if you've listened to this podcast from the beginning, you will know there are certain topics that I don't even like really mentioning. And when I do, I really sort of skirt over, and things like violence towards minors, essay, all this kind of stuff are things that I don't like to watch, read about, hear about. It really is triggering. But her book, she does not go into like graphics into, I think it's about like only 2 or 3 pages where she goes into graphics, a bit more graphic details. But her book, and why I thought I really wanted to have her on, is because her book had sort of a transformative effect on me. And it really sort of encompasses all the contradictions in life that can live in parallel. And so I thought that her views and the way that she explains it is really interesting, and I really wanted to share that with you. And so, because of the content, I actually do want to add something in this introduction of how I experienced this interview. Okay, sometimes I come off of an interview and I'm like, oh, I should have asked this. Oh, I forgot, I should have said this instead. Or, like little things, nothing overly major. But this one stood out because there were actually a lot more questions that I wanted to ask. And it was like all of a sudden the reality dawned on me once I was faced with Karen. She was in front of me on the Zoom, and I was having a conversation with her, and it's like all of a sudden I became really cognizant that some of the questions that I had, including some that I had sent to her in the outline, it felt like as if I would be chasing the sensationalism of it. And, there are victims in the story, not just the victims, obviously, of his crimes. There's also the families of these victims. And the other victims as well that are never really mentioned, other than obviously in her book she does, but they are usually forgotten about, are the family of the person who was a serial killer. Some of them are still alive and they are also victims. It is really hard to wake up to that kind of reality when your brother or your son or, turns out to be a serial killer. So Yeah, all of a sudden it felt like it was not my place, and it felt really wrong to go there. Almost like I was going to put salt in the wounds of people I did not even know, who had never met me. And I'm just not in the business of doing that. This is obviously a topic that I am not familiar enough to be able to put myself in their shoes, to be able to feel okay with certain of these questions. And so, having said that, don't get me wrong, after the interview, there was a part of me that was like, damn, I should have asked those questions. And um and something else also that came up is that, the same night after the interview with Karen, when I went to bed, I had a nightmare. And the nightmare was from, I think it's the last story that she tells in her book, and it's about a different criminal. And it's about someone called DS. So I will let you read the book. But in my nightmare, I was a little girl, and I woke up, like I was really scared when I woke up. And so the reason why I'm telling you this is that, of course, when I read those things and I do certain interviews, it does affect me. I'm not doing this lightly. Um, and this is definitely not topics that usually come easy to me. But it's because I felt like the reason why I'm bringing this in is because I thought there's a really, really important angle that Karen brings up, and I really do admire her. Even though, years ago, I would have looked at her thinking, why on earth is she defending someone like Gacy? Not understanding what it was that she stood for and what she was doing. It would have been from a very ignorant point of view, but I would have felt very strongly in that. And I totally understand if you do feel like that. And it's obviously down to you to decide, what's right and what isn't, for you. So, yeah, there are more sides to a story. And this is the story that I wanted to bring you today. So, please, without further ado, help me give a big, warm welcome to Karen. Let's begin. Welcome to the show, Karen. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
It's nice to be here, Angie.
No, really, I am really big, big, big thank you for joining me today, because it's a true honor to have you on the show. There's so many things I could say about you and your book off the bat, but I want to obviously, we were going to explore, explore what you're about in your book throughout the interview. And I want obviously the audience to read your book, where there'll be a lot more details. But I just have so much respect for you, because you have such commitment to following your moral compass and doing what's right, and not just to follow it, but to follow it through when it's going to be unpopular. And there's been some really tough times doing what you do, but your grace in understanding opposing views are qualities I really admire, especially in everything that you've had to face in your career and doing what you've done and doing what you do. So your book moved me several times. I know I've told you this before in the pre-chat, but it has this really raw humanity and acknowledgement of life's many, many contradictions. And I believe that life is in the gray. There's many, many viewpoints, many ways of looking at things. So I am thrilled to have you on the show to interview you today. So before we dive in, Karen, please introduce yourself, where you live and what you do.
My name is Karen Conti. I've been a lawyer for 37 years in the Chicago area. I've lived in the Chicago area almost all my life. And I also do a radio show. For about 30 years, I've had one in the Chicago market. And I also do some television news commentary on legal issues on national and local television. And now I'm an author.
Yes. And before we go into your book and John Wayne Gacy, I just want to go over some basics that it's going to help us understand, the premises of important aspects of your book. There's just basically just three things I just want to go over, and then we'll go into the case. What are the legal factors determining criminal insanity?
Okay. Well, in the United States, we have a standard that's very difficult for a defendant to meet. You have to show two things. First is that the defendant suffers from some sort of mental issue, some sort of mental health issue or disorder. The second part is that you must prove that that disorder or illness causes the defendant not to understand that his actions are right or wrong. So it's sometimes simple to prove that somebody like Gacy or some criminal has mental health issues or personality disorder, but it's very difficult to prove that that person didn't know the difference between right and wrong. Why is that? Well, whenever you bury your bodies or you hide things from the police, you obviously know that what you did was illegal. So even though what Gacy did seems to me to be insane, under a legal standard, it didn't really even come close.
Yeah, because if you know the difference between right and wrong, is it because that means that there was like a chance for you not to act on those impulses, but you did act on it, and then you were hiding it from the authorities?
That's exactly correct, because the purpose of the insanity defense is to say that you didn't have the intention to commit a crime. And under our law, you have to have some sort of intent. And whether it's a reduced intent, like reckless homicide or something like that, or a first degree, which is a premeditated murder, the law says that if you really don't know what you're doing and you don't know the difference between right and wrong, that we can't punish you in the same way. Now, we can punish you and put you in a mental institution, but we can't put you in a penitentiary. And the people who get the insanity defense are generally people who are really psychotic, like people who are paranoid schizophrenic, who are hearing voices and walking around talking to people. And those people, in a lot of ways, do not know the difference between right and wrong. But that's very, very uncommon.
And they're in a different reality. So even for them, they may have a sense of right and wrong, maybe, but it doesn't relate. We cannot associate with it in our reality that we live us here, right? It's almost like being on a different plane, right?
Right.
So I was just thinking, because when you said that, are there any like famous cases that were prosecuted and sentenced under the insanity? What's the word for it? Like insanity defense?
They were not guilty by reason of insanity. That's how we would say it. And there was a very famous case of John Hinckley, who tried to assassinate President Ronald Reagan. And he had the belief that Jodie Foster, the actress, he was going to impress her by trying to kill the president. That was his logic. And he was paranoid schizophrenic and had a number of other issues. And interestingly, he was put into a mental institution for many, many years. He took his medicine. He became better. He was a model prisoner, and he was actually released not too long ago and is living a somewhat productive life. So, but that's a very rare situation, because a lot of times people who are found not guilty by reason of insanity do stay in the mental institution for life, just because they can't shake that, the part of them that doesn't understand the right and wrong.
Yeah. That sounds really unusual. I feel for those who live in the area. So the other bit I want to ask you is, what gives a self-admitted, self-confessed, to a certain extent, not to the full extent he did, but like someone who, wait, let me rephrase this. If we know for sure that, the defendant is, in fact, is a serial killer, and, there is no doubt about that, you're not going to try and plead, go for the innocence, I don't know what the legal word is, but you're not going to try. You're basically, the person is guilty for sure, and let's say it's a serial killer. What gives them the rights to legal representation?
Well, everyone in the United States is entitled to a legal counsel every step of the way, during the course of the interrogation, as to trial, as to every appeal along the way, and throughout the death penalty appeals. That's just the way our system works. And if he can't afford an attorney for most of those appeals, a publicly appointed and paid for attorney would be appointed. And this is really the cornerstone of our system, because everybody, once the government decides to go after you, and some of these arguments that I'm going to make are really not applicable to Gacy, because Gacy really was very guilty, and there was no question about it. But many of the people on death row have walked away on actual innocence findings. So it's really important that there's a defense lawyer there, because if the defense lawyer doesn't do a good job and properly defend, then that person could be wrongfully accused and convicted. And then guess what? Someone else is out there walking around doing those crimes.
Yeah.
So everybody in the system has to do their piece, the prosecution and the police. They have to get the evidence and they've got to present it. And the defense lawyer has to zealously advocate. And the jury has to be fair and impartial and follow the law. And the judge has to conduct the trial in a way that everyone gets their chance to speak. And if all of those parties do their part, we have a very good system and justice is generally done.
But so let's take in the case of Gacy, right? Who was, clearly guilty. And when someone is clearly guilty, when you meet them, what is the reasoning behind of why on earth should they get legal representation? Which is different from someone who's just been accused, and of course due diligence and processes need to be taken place, because you don't want someone who's wrongly convicted and then sitting on death row or sitting life in prison, right, for a crime that they hadn't committed, and then you have then you have the actual culprits out there continuing their rampage. So what would, if you could express that, what is, what in your view gives them the legal right for representation?
Well, we have a legal right. Everyone has a legal right to counsel. So that's just in the Constitution. That's
but in terms of more like the morality and the philosophy behind it,
because that's my job. I defend people. I defend people who beat their wives. I defend asbestos companies that poison people and cause cancer. I represent victims of crimes to try to get the defendant prosecuted. I represent people who embezzle from their church. I represent people who do all kinds of horrible things. And that's my job. And I always give the analogy of a doctor. When an overweight 500-pound man comes in and he's smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day and is eating junk food and he's having a heart attack, the doctor doesn't say, you know what, you lived a really bad life. I'm going to choose not to help you. Mm-hmm. Everyone understands that no matter how you've lived your life or abused your body, a doctor is going to take care of you. Hey, maybe he'll save his life, maybe he won't, but he's going to try to do the best to get the best result possible. That's what I do. And just so your listeners understand, my goal was never to get him out of prison. It was not an actual innocence case. By the time I got the case, which was at the final end of the death row appeals, I was just trying to have the execution stopped. That was my only goal. And obviously I didn't win it, but my goal was not only to represent Gacy, but also to represent all the other defendants in all the prisons in the country on these issues. Because if Gacy is going to be executed, then it's just easier to execute the next person who may have those actual innocence arguments or racist prosecution arguments or incompetent counsel arguments, and all of those really common arguments that land people on death row. Mm. So it was sort of like you were representing a cause in addition to representing your defendant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because to me, I'm sort of thinking it in a different way. Because obviously, because I'm not a lawyer, I don't have the kind of resilience and, the stomach that you have to do what you do. And I probably have a bit of a naive view of the reality of it. But something kept coming up to me as to why on earth should they even get legal representation when someone's done all these morbid crimes and we know they've done it and they've admitted to some of them or one of them, that kind of thinking, right? And it's almost like I'm thinking, it's going to sound really stupid, but do you know if you've ever seen the movie The Joker with Joaquin Phoenix?
Yes.
In that movie, and I know a lot of my friends disagree with me on this, but in that movie, even though what he does is, it's disgusting, right? He's he just kills someone and doesn't think about it, twice after. But it showed a version of him in his past. There was this sensitivity in this, or this. There was a human part of him, and I know it's a fictive story, but that it's almost like everyone gets to where they are for a reason, whether we understand that or not, or whether it means that everyone else would get to that same outcome if they were in their shoes. We don't know that, and it's not. Some people have horrible, horrible childhood, and you don't see them committing crime like that, right? But everyone has a different, almost like a different blueprint in their DNA and how they perceive the world. But I guess there's almost, I mean, there's obviously exceptions, I'm sure, but there's sometimes circumstances that get someone to where they are. And I know in your book you mentioned about the TBI, traumatic brain injuries, which causes, if people get enough, get kicked in the head enough times when they're a kid by their parents, and some people do, it will do something, and it can go the wrong way. So there are sometimes, there's more dimensions to a person, even though we love to hate them for what they've done.
Well, and you know what, and in my book, I do a lot of speculation based upon what I've read about Gacy in particular and about sociopaths in general. And, I talk about his upbringing. Again, not to excuse it, because you're absolutely right. There are people who are, raised in horrendous situations with horrible abuse, much worse than Gacy, and they didn't turn around and kill 33 boys. Okay, so I'm not saying that to excuse. I'm trying to explain it, and I would hope that our society at some point would try to figure out how to stop people like this, and not just Gacy, the world record killer at the time, but people who are murderous and people who abuse women and people who do horrible things. Is there a way to recognize, at some point, is there a point of no return where we have to lock them up? And the answer in my head is yes. Gacy was not born evil, I'm quite convinced, but at some point there was a point of no return, and he needed to be locked up, and he should never have gotten out of prison, and he didn't. So
Yeah.
yeah, I completely agree with you. But as to your point of someone being really guilty, I just got a quick story. We had 12 people exonerated from death row in about a 15-year period in our state, and 12 were executed. So we had 12 executed and 12 walked off, not on technicalities, but on actual innocence grounds.
Yeah.
And one in particular was convicted by 12 jurors. And the jurors said, you don't deserve to live. There's no good reason to ever have you walk this earth again. And it was reversed on appeal. Another 12 came to that unanimous conclusion that he was guilty beyond any reasonable doubt and that he didn't deserve to live. It went back up on appeal, and they came back again, and a third jury did that. Actually innocent. Someone was sitting there saying, I committed the murder. Finally, the DNA proved that he did. This guy was almost executed. And look at all the people and the judges, probably 60 judges agreed with the jurors. So you sit there and you think mistakes can be made.
Yeah.
Whether you think he's really, really guilty, it's a slippery slope, is what I'm saying.
It's a very slippery slope, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and I interviewed Dr. Louise Hewitt from the Innocence Project, the London, the UK Innocence Project. And yes, I mean, you have people who are accused of crimes that just like really, I mean, I'm not even gonna say, word them here, because it was really, really like appalling. And that person, I think, was in prison for I don't know how many years, like over 2 decades. And then finally they were found innocent, and they were exonerated and all of that stuff. But by that time, I mean, they went in as a young man, and they came out as a much older person, and I mean, their life was taken away from them. But yeah, it's just things like that do happen. And that's why, I mean, that's why I definitely believe due diligence and processes really have to be done properly.
And
because you
I
just
will
don't
say,
know.
the worse the crime, the more likely a mistake is going to be made. And you're saying to yourself, how is that, Karen? Well, if you have 33 young men, killed in the prime of their life, tortured, brutally murdered, and you're a juror and you're sitting there and you're looking at the defendant in the chair, you're like, I got to put someone away here, because this is too horrible to even consider any other option. I can't possibly make a mistake here and let this guy walk if there's any way. And that's not what our system is about. System is about beyond a reasonable doubt. And I'm not saying we didn't have that with Gacy. I'm just saying the worse the crime, the more likely the jury wants to convict, because they don't want to make a mistake and let someone walk.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's scary. I mean, it is scary. I mean, the minute someone arrests you and you're accused, you have to fight for your innocence. And that's very scary. And you would want that due diligence to happen if it happened to your father, your son, your brother, your mother, your sister. Sometimes people forget that this could happen to anyone, it could happen to anyone. I mean, to be wrongly arrested. I'm not saying
yes,
to
absolutely.
do what Gacy does. And then the last one, before you go into the Gacy's case, is, do you have a line in terms of, are there certain types of criminals you just would not go in and defend? Do you have a line about that? Or you just like, no, this is my job, I'm the lawyer, and I will just defend?
Well, at this point in my life, I'm not doing criminal work, so I'm not taking on these cases anymore. I just moved my practice into a different place right now. And you want to do different things with your life, and the practice of law is all consuming. So actually, there are certain people I probably wouldn't represent. I can't think of who they might be. I don't. I know this sounds very odd, but like somebody who is a racist, shooter of a mass shooter, I would have a hard time with that. And I know you're saying, well, Gacy killed 33 boys. You know, I just think Gacy had a different scenario. I think people who intentionally, I mean, not to say Gacy didn't intentionally kill these people. He was definitely mentally ill, and he didn't rise to the level of an insanity defense. But I still think he was a compulsive killer, and that had he been able to choose, he wouldn't have done what he did. I just don't. I think it was compulsive, and some of the psychiatrists who examined him said the exact same thing. But someone who targets people in a 4th of July parade because they want to kill Jews or Black people or whatever, I would have a real hard time with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can call that a little bit hypocritical or whatever, but that's just the way I'm wired.
Yeah, no, I mean we all have a line, right? We all have a line, and we all have, and that's no, I mean it makes sense. It does make sense. So okay, so let's get into Gacy. Oh my God, am I pronouncing his name right? Is it Gacy or Gassy? I'm saying Gacy.
It's Gacy.
Gacy, okay. Yeah, I feel like he would come down and just with his ego if he could. So I just want to premise this, that even though Gacy was executed 20 years ago, it's obviously a difficult topic, and it's filled with contradicting emotions and views living in parallel in my head. And he has committed the worst crimes in my book. And I want to make sure, and I know that's something that you also mentioned in your book. I want to make sure that I don't do the victims and the families any disservice. I'm not show empathy, because I do. I feel for them, like I would want to tear his throat out and torture him to a slow and painful death. Like I wouldn't be nice had he done that to my family. And so it's like living in two worlds at once, where weirdly enough, when reading about your experience, I see parts of him that are likable. And like for a short moment, I forget the atrocities he committed. And then just as quickly, I'm reminded, that he's not to be trusted. I would not sleep at night if I knew he was my neighbor. And, obviously not him, but who knows, maybe someone in the neighborhood is like that, because most seem to be in utter disbelief when he got arrested. And when they found what they found in his house, people around him did not expect that, a lot of people did not expect that. So to those who are unfamiliar with his case, because I wasn't familiar with it until I read your book, can you summarize what he was sentenced for?
Sure. So this was back in the 1970s. Gacy was a contractor, and he was a very successful contractor living in a suburb of Chicago. It was a nice, neat, modest suburb. And he was going out at night. He was working all day long, volunteering in the church, doing political work, entertaining children as a clown, doing all these good things. And then he would go out at night and he would troll for young men and boys, and he would take them to his house and he would torture them and sexually abuse them and kill them. And then he would bury them, most of them underneath his house in the crawl space. So 29 were buried underneath and 4 were thrown into the nearby river. And Gacy was caught in 1978 and arrested and immediately confessed, almost with a photographic memory, to who these men were and where he found them and what happened with them and where he buried them under his house. And then flash ahead 14 years, I'm now a lawyer. I was in high school when that happened. And we all remember that because it was really it was a shock to the world. I mean, 33 was a world record at that time. So I'm now a lawyer, and we get the call to represent him. So his execution date had been set, and he was really out of traditional appeals. And so this was the last set of appeals that he was entitled to.
Yeah, I mean, you were not given an easy job, because you were not even far into your career, right, by the time you got that call.
No, I
You were
was a pretty
still,
inexperienced lawyer, but fortunately for Gacy, he had two really experienced death penalty lawyers. And then my partner, who was also an experienced lawyer, but not in the death penalty, was also on the team. And then there was me. So I took on some different roles with the four lawyers, and I did a lot of the talking to the press because part of your job as a death penalty lawyer is to talk about why the death penalty is wrong. Because if people didn't want us to have a death penalty, we wouldn't have one. Our elected officials and our prosecutors are driven by public opinion, and therefore part of your job is to explain why it's wrong, even for somebody like John Wayne Gacy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, now that you bring up the death penalty, it's funny because I quite similar to what you wrote in the book. Actually, I'd always, for some reason, always felt like I was always like against it for three main reasons. One is, first of all, is if someone is, guilty of horrendous crime, is letting them off easy, why not let them rot in a cell and make them think about what they did? Not that they're really gonna, some of them are not gonna have any remorse, so they're not gonna think, but at least they're gonna be away from society. Two, what if that person is innocent? Then it's death. There's a high price to pay. And three is like, how can we show that killing or that a crime is bad by killing in return? It just shows that we just know better. Um, but then when reading your book and reading about Gacy, is that I was just like, but lethal injection, surely not as bad as what he's done to his victims. There is a part of me that's like, well, if it's gonna happen, I was like, well, not as bad as what he's done to others. There is still that voice. Not that I think that an organized murder, which is what it is is of moral upper standing. Is not.
Yeah, and I think too, you can rephrase the question, and this is what I always do, which is not to say why should we keep him alive, but why should we kill him? Why should we pay attention to these people? It's I will tell you, and here's me. I wrote the book, and I got the name of the serial killer in the book title, so I understand that you may think I'm being hypocritical, but we don't remember the names of the victims. We are focused on Gacy because every time his appeals came up, the execution was huge news across in the world. We had people from the media in Italy and South Korea and Costa Rica, and this was covered by every international outlet, and it gave attention to somebody who shouldn't be getting any attention because
Yeah.
he was a sociopath and what he did was horrible. But again, there are so many reasons not to do it. And to me, that's the better question. Why should we execute him? Why should we make this a hoopla? Why should we be in the business of it? If it worked, if it deterred others from committing crimes, and it's all the studies, even the people who are in favor of the death penalty cannot make that argument because those studies have been done and they show actually where we have more death penalties in our country, there are more murders. So it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the irony of the whole thing, is that because obviously a death penalty case, is gonna it's gonna command a lot of journalistic attention. It's gonna be in the news, the media, all of that stuff, and it's just giving him attention that he was basically loving. He loved the
Yes,
attention. It's hard on the
yes.
victims of the family's victims and the victims who escaped. It really does do the opposite of what is intended. It's not really bringing peace to the families because his name keeps being brought up, and here I am bringing it up, right? So it's like it is like, yeah, I can see why. I mean, that is a good argument against the death penalty that you're making. You're definitely a good lawyer. So can you tell us about, because some parts of your book, we're not going to tell all of them. I do really want the listeners to read it. I'm going to explain why at the end, but there's a few scary moments in your book, but I really want you to just in your own words, like I want to hear like about your initial encounter with John Wayne Gacy, and I mean that bullpen, like terrifying to read. Can you just explain a little bit about your first encounter with Gacy?
Well, a lot of people asked me if I was afraid going in there, and I really was not afraid of Gacy. And I had read a lot about him over the years before I was even hired. And I knew that he was what we call an organized serial killer, which means that he planned his attack, he planned his victims, he planned what he was going to do, and then he executed on them. And he wasn't what we call like an out of control, disorganized killer who would kill on a whim, or that would be immediately violent for no good reason. He was a predator. So first of all, I wasn't his type. And second of all, I knew that he needed me and he was going to manipulate me because that's what sociopaths do. And that I was not a person who I was not endangered because of him. But what was interesting was when I got to death row, and I didn't know this, was that, you normally think of that plexiglass
Mm-hmm.
little cubicle where the lawyer's on one side and the criminal's on the other side, and you can't even talk, you can't even touch them. Well, in death row at that time, it was a bullpen. So you literally were with the guards. The guards put you into this bullpen. They locked the door, and you were in not only with Gacy, with your own defendant, but all the other crazy defendants who committed the most horrible crimes in Illinois history. There were people who killed their family or poisoned their loved ones or shot up people on the highway or ate body parts. I mean, these are people who are truly not in control of
Yeah.
themselves. So
Yeah.
I wasn't afraid of Gacy, but those people who also had nothing left to lose because they were on death row were a little daunting to me. But Gacy himself was really very unimposing. He was 5'9", so that's, pretty short. He was kind of paunchy, and you could not look at him and think he was capable of what he did. He was
Mm.
charming, he was talkative, he was affable, he was humorous, and he just did not appear to be somebody who was evil. Not to say that he would have a tattooed on his forehead, but you understood immediately why he got away with it because you could never know by talking to him that he was capable of these acts.
Yeah, I mean, he knows how to turn on the charm, and he's very, very funny. That's the part when he's funny, when he cracks a joke. Those are the moments where I forget. That's the moments in the book where I'm like, oh God, this guy is funny, and then I'm like, oh shit, no, but he's horrible.
I'd like to address that for 1 second, Angie,
Mm.
because I don't love to talk about how funny Gacy was because everyone's going to say, "Oh, Karen, how funny was he? He killed all those kids,
No, I
right?"
mean, I found him. I mean, I found the things that was. I thought he was. I thought that was funny. I mean, but
But I would be remiss in describing him
mm,
in my conversations with him if I did not include the fact that he was rip roaring funny. But I also talk about how I think he really used humor
yeah,
to deflect some of the darkness that he had in him and to attract people, because humor is something that is very appealing to people. People who are funny, everyone wants to be around them because people love to laugh and people love to make fun of things and have a good belly laugh. And Gacy used that humor to put people at ease.
yeah.
And I think it was important for me to address that in my book.
Oh yeah, and I do know it's funny because I that's exactly how I interpreted it, because it is important to mention, because otherwise people are like, well, how did he lure his victims? But that's the thing, they're very charming, and humor is a sedative.
Yes.
It puts you at ease straight away. You laugh, your body relaxes. It's a sedative, and it is known that you know I don't know if it's sociopath or psychopath, but they are very good at knowing what you want to hear and how to make you feel at ease. And they can reflect,
Yes.
and they're in total control of what comes out in their facial expression, all of that stuff. So it is an important factor, is how you lure the prey. So it is, you would totally be remiss. And actually, when you say that, it's making me think about, there's a famous case that I grew up with, because I grew up in Belgium, and there was this case of this guy called Marc Dutroux. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Marc Dutroux, he was the main fall guy. He was not violent. He committed like horrendous crimes, and he ran a pedophile circle. He was basically kidnapping kids and then selling them on and renting them out and all that kind of stuff, right? And there's many of them were killed. Some of them were found and escaped. But he's morbid, really morbid. But he wasn't the only one. But he took the main fall. Now he was number one wanted guy in Belgium, once he got arrested and everything, some of it came out to light of what had happened, what was going on. Everybody, we all knew what he looked like. We all knew, and a lot of it he had, by that time, we knew he was definitely guilty. Anyway, in Belgium at the time, there's a reason why I'm telling this story based on the humor of Gacy, right? That I think it was like weekly, the defendants were allowed in Belgium to, whilst they were waiting for trial, he was in a prison. Weekly, they could go to a specific library to research their case. It's part of their rights. And so for that to happen, he had to be shackled, taken into a van, and then, the guards were taking him there. He was surveilled all the time. I mean, he's meant to be. One day, he bloody escaped. He escaped from the van. Number one, you know what he's done. They all know what he's done. Anyway, he got found. He didn't run that far. Like, someone found him. He ran into the woods. Anyway, what had transpired was that he was so good with people, so good, that he had charmed his way in with these guards. And this is what I recall. I may be wrong, maybe but this is what I recall from the story. And I was a teenager at the time, so this is a long time ago. But what I recall was that he was so good with people that he had managed somehow to not be shackled anymore on these trips. And obviously someone looked away for long enough, was distracted long enough that he had a chance to get out and run away. That's how good they are. So when you said about the humor, and me for a moment go, oh my God, he's so funny. I was like, well, yeah, there you go. There you go. Has it ever made you wary about charming people?
Oh, yes. I think the most chilling experience with Gacy was not being with him, but wondering about the other people in my life who I'm riding the bus with, who I work with, who I know casually. Are they sociopaths too? What are they doing? Like, are they manipulating? And am I just not paying attention? Because frankly, I knew about Gacy before I met him because I had read psychiatry reports. I'd read a lot about him. So I knew that he was going to try to manipulate me. And I knew that he was a liar. And I knew he was going to use charm and humor. So I was aware of it. And so I knew how to get around that and kind of manipulate him back. But again, I don't think we are on our guards like that with people. I just don't think we are. Especially I see, I do some family law work and I see a lot of these kinds of people on dating sites who are super charming, good looking, intelligent, well educated, good jobs, and they are just evil to the core. But It's hard to see that from the beginning, especially when you're in a relationship or trying to be in a relationship where you're opening yourself up and you're giving that person information that they are going to turn around and use against you the first chance they get.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's a very pernicious situation. That's just, we see that more. And not all these people are violent. I'm not saying a narcissist has to be violent, but they certainly can do a lot of damage.
For sure. And like you said, like they're going to have the good jobs, they're going to be nice. And and obviously it's not saying that everybody with a good job and who is nice is going to be a sociopath, but it's just to show that, it's like, for example, pedophile is obviously going to be in places where he's going to have access, right? And the same thing with someone who wants to hurt people is going to be in position of access. Like some people are going to move into a HR position. Some people are going to move into a different kind of position, like positions that even psychotherapists, you just never know. I'm not saying it doesn't mean they all are, obviously not. Those are the exceptions that, will move into those situations, but it's a smart move. Why wouldn't you make a move like that if you want to inflict pain or get access to the kind of person that you want to, get your energy from in some way, twisted way? So yeah, no, I did wonder about that, like, because obviously you are, that's part of your job is to be, back then is to be surrounded by dangerous people. And I wonder, like, what were your coping mechanism really? Because I mean, it must be incredibly stressful to be around people that some of them are just, not great.
Well, I actually use humor, whether I articulate it or not. And sometimes it's just the humor in your head where you're making light of something that someone does or says, and looking at the irony of of what people are doing and saying. So I think that gallows humor is very helpful in coping, and it's not always popular to articulate some of these things,
Yeah.
but it really does help with coping with anything in life. Anything, if you can make light of it, it sort of takes the edge off of some of it. Gacy was manipulative, but I was protected from him. I mean, I could choose when I would deal with him and not deal with him. But you could add to that the stress of representing somebody in something really serious, because, when I represent people in civil suits, they're going to lose $500,000. Okay, they'll move on, they'll be alive, or they're divorced, or whatever it is. That's going to be bad, but there's a chance of them getting back up on the horse and doing just fine, if not better, depending on how they deal with it. But for a case like Gacy's, how I knew it was going to end, that's a very stressful thing, even though I knew that it was a fait accompli. I didn't delude myself into thinking, oh, I'm going to save his life, but I had to try, and I knew it was futile. And that's really hard, to have somebody's life in your hands, literally, and to try as hard as you can, knowing it's not going to work. And that was very stressful.
Mm-hmm. But that is like what it is to fight for what's right, and not everyone can do what you did. It doesn't matter if you agree with your viewpoint or not. It doesn't mean, I mean, obviously you agree with your viewpoint, but I mean, it doesn't mean if someone agrees with you or not. There is no taking away from the fact that fighting for what you believe, and then seeing it through to the finishing line, literally, and having it impact your life in good and bad ways. And I think you've made it like into, it's been hard, but I think it's almost was it's almost like it was like a meant to be situation. There's so much like in your book. Like, okay, I'm just gonna say it now, but like when I read your book, like for me, like there's a lot of the topics in there that are normally like extremely triggering for me. And I actually appreciate the fact that you did not bring up a lot of the the details of the gory stuff. Basically, I think it's only about 2 or 3 pages throughout the book, but reading it through your eyes and your experience and all of these things, the book for me was actually quite healing, in the sense that like topics like this are very, very triggering for me normally, and it has almost sort of alleviated the fear of the evil of some people, right? Especially, as I mentioned about Marc Dutroux, like in Belgium, that's how I grew up. That's my experience of like, there was a lot of things like that going on. We had to be very aware, always alert. And, and different things in life, happens. And it's like, it just makes you a bit wary and things like that. But it's almost like it was like facing, the shadow or the evil of some kind, and then sort of coming through. And it was very, very healing. And so I'm very appreciative of your book. And I think that what you've done with it, is, to me, it's important. And what your story matters, and the book really matters. And I think it has an effect that I did not expect it. I was almost scared.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I tell people this, and I've heard people say this about the book, that it's not, it's about Gacy because, Gacy is the draw, because the name is going to draw people in. But it's really the story of overcoming something, doing something out of your wheelhouse, out of your area of comfort, using that opportunity to hone your skills and to develop different sets of skills and different coping mechanisms, so that when that bad part of your life or that adverse situation is done, you can be better, and you can be resilient, and you can be confident, and you can be prepared for the next opportunity. And I know that sounds kind of Pollyanna, but that's really, when I look back 30 years after the execution, that representation of Gacy was terrible for me. I lost clients. I lost $250,000 of money that I wasn't, doing other clients. I had the public backlash that was horrible. Physical threats.
Yeah.
And yet, a lot of the good things that happened in my career and personally were directly related to the Gacy experience.
Yeah.
So I think that I'm glad I waited to write the book, because now I have hindsight and looking back on and putting it in perspective in my life.
Yeah, and you got to teach as well on it, and the death penalty got revoked or lifted. I don't know what I can't remember the legal word, but it's not existing now in some states. So there has been some good out of it and obviously for some people who view it differently and are pro death penalty, they're not going to see it that way. And you know, everyone has the right to their own opinion, of course. Um, but I think that's the thing when you mentioned about the public. When I was reading your book, I was like, I'm not sure who's more scary, the 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 incarcerated criminals in prison or the public. Because at some point, like some of these threats and the hatred and stuff. I mean, how do you work through that? How do you carry on? Because you're here talking on a podcast and you're here still, writing the book. Like, what is it that makes you go on and despite all of this noise out there? And obviously I can see you're in one piece, you're safe, touch wood, like everything's good. But like, what makes you like? Because some people would shy away from it, and just be like so scared.
Well, I think there's a thin line between naivete and bravery. And I'm quite sure that it was naivete going in, that I really thought that everyone would understand that everyone deserves a defense. This is the cornerstone of our entire system. It doesn't matter what you've done. You get a lawyer. That's just what you do. And the lawyer fights. And the lawyer, in the case of a criminal defendant, loses most of the time because the government usually has the evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the person is guilty. So, but I think what happens here is that because Gacy was so bad and so evil, and it was sexual in nature, the things that he did, that I think there are a lot of people out there who have been harmed sexually and who have been harmed in different ways, and that this evoked some really bad feelings for a lot of people. You can call it triggering, you can call it whatever you want. And so instead of rationalizing and saying, oh, she's just doing her job, even though Gacy's a piece of, I'm not going to be mad at her because she's a lawyer. Shoot, I'd probably hire her if I were in trouble, right? Or my kid was in trouble. They weren't parsing it like that. The hatred for the Gacy's of the world and maybe other people in their lives was being focused and directed to me. And I understand that. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I don't like it, but I understand that. So I don't want to be threatened. I'd like people to understand I'm doing my job, but I also understand that there's a lot of emotional damage that is out there and physical damage that causes people to do those things.
Yeah. No, I do understand. I do. That's the thing. But that's the thing, isn't it? That's the thing about your book, is that there's all these different realities living in parallel with each other. Like, I understand why they feel that way about you, but also you doing what you did doesn't mean that you agree with what he did. There's a big difference. It's such a big difference. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the thing I should do.
And even the victims' families, people say, you don't care about the victims' families. How could I not? How could I be a human being and not just be heartbroken that their beautiful son and in some case husband and friends? I can't be in a room of more than 50 people in Chicago where somebody doesn't know a victim's family member or is a victim's family member. That's how prolific he was. So I get it. I can't say I can put myself in your shoes because I can't. I cannot do that. But I do feel for the victims' families. But my job was such that wasn't part of my job. And if that sounds cold, that's the lawyer that you get when you hire somebody to zealously advocate for your interests.
Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do your job if you were right. Overcome by those emotions. Because of course, you're a human being and you feel. So that's the thing. We talked about his personality traits and. Some parts of it, because there's also mention about his family and the relationships that he has, and I can't just like it's weird because when I read your book, it almost, to me, it feels like he's like Jekyll and Hyde, because for some people he's the last face, like he's like he represents hell on earth, their last moments here in suffering. And then to others he's like this funny neighbor that that they like, and he's smart and sharp and whatever, and he knows what to say when. It's almost like he's Jekyll and Hyde. And so like the impact on the family, like like to me, it's like I don't even know how one begins to process that. Like, can you talk a little bit about what happens? What have you noticed in terms of like the family members, and it goes even to like the prison guards and you as his lawyer, like having this relationship to someone that you know what they've done, but at the same time, like especially for the family, is their family. Like how was that for them? Like, was it complete shock? Did some of them have any idea? Like, what is it that you're allowed to say? I don't know, but
Well, the family had no clue. And I had become friends with his sister and had been friendly with her for 30 years. She just died a couple of days ago, actually, which is unfortunate.
sorry to
But
hear.
she said if he didn't tell me that he did it, because she called him up while he was in the police station and said, John, did you do this? Tell me you didn't do this. And he said, I did it. And she said, that's the only reason I would have ever believed
Yeah.
that he did it. Even if he had the bodies in the basement, she said, I would not have believed it. He was kind, he was loving, he was generous. He was nice to me. He was nice to my family. He was nice to his two wives. He was nice to his kids. So his family and his friends unconditionally loved him. And I watched them stream in hours before the execution, and they were sobbing. And they loved him. They understood what he did. They didn't know ahead of time what he did. But even though they knew that he was capable of all this stuff, they still loved him. So, the sister, frankly, can you imagine being the sister of John Wayne Gacy and what that was
No.
like? I mean, they all had to change their names. They all moved out of town. They don't want to be associated with him, but they still loved him. And when he was executed, they suffered again
Yeah.
because he was being killed. And they can't even be righteous in their grief, because the victims' families can be righteous in their grief, but she couldn't be. And so, and she couldn't explain it. I talked to her, like, was your dad really that bad? Was he abusive? He was abusive, but not that bad, and blah, blah, blah. And she still couldn't figure out what made him the way he was. I mean, and she had all these different speculations about it. But she said, and the bottom line is, I just don't know. That's not the John that I knew. The John that I knew was good, good, good. And he had this compartmentalized side, like you said, the Jekyll and Hyde, that he would go out and do this, and then he'd wake up and he'd live his good life until he didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they make, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine for the families. But yeah, I think some people definitely are able to show two very different sides, depending on who they're with. And the reason behind that, I will never know, but of course, but it's just, yeah. It must be a shock because it really is like a different reality. It's like you wake up to a nightmare and you're like, how can my brother do this? Who is this man? And at the same time, you live with the memories of the good brother, the one that you knew. Yeah, I can't even. Yeah. So I want to ask you, like, what was the well, you know what? Maybe I had this question about what was the biggest curveball working a case like this, and you said earlier about how you had this naivete at the beginning, and I remember this in your book. And you're like, well, everyone's going to agree, you can't just be killing people just because it's legal. But was that the biggest curveball working on a case like this, or was there something else?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah,
I'm not
no.
here.
What was the biggest curveball working a case like this?
I'm sorry. What are you saying, Kurt? What is the biggest
Oh,
hurdle?
yeah. Curveball. It's probably just my pronunciation. Curveball. Curveball.
I
So
don't know what that means.
okay. How do I say? So basically, what was the most another way to say this would be the most surprising thing? Like, what took you like what blindsided you? What was the biggest, like, yeah, blindsiding moment in a case like this?
I think that there were several things. I think that the fact that I was so distraught when he was executed, we were not friends. We had a cordial relationship. I spent a lot of time with him. I had pleasant conversations with him. I had some confrontational issues with him, But for the most part, I developed a relationship with him. And when somebody is killed, it's a very confusing thing because you want to call the authorities and you realize the authorities are exactly who's doing it.
Yeah.
And it's very confusing. And I will tell you, I wasn't the only one. People in my office did not like the fact that we were representing Gacy and told us so. But after 7 months of taking his calls and chatting with him and corresponding with him, and he knew the names of their family members, and he did his charming thing on them, they were all distraught when he was executed. They were really upset. So when you get to know somebody, even if you don't really like them or you don't become really close friends with someone dying is just such a horrible thing, especially when it was inflicted intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
So that shocked me. That stayed with me for a long time. That grief, it's hard to describe because who
Yeah.
goes through that, right? I don't
Yeah.
know many
Yeah.
people who have gone through that kind of thing.
And it's bittersweet because it's not a grief that you can necessarily be, like you said, righteous about, right? Because of who it is and what he's done. But it's interesting because it made me think of something that, it's kind of the power of a master manipulator like he is, or, the sociopath that he is. That, of course you're gonna, we would fall for his charm and he's so simpatico and all of that. But he's like that until he does you wrong, right? He's like that until he chooses you as the victim. So it's almost like but it is the power of, that's the power they have, how they lure people in. And obviously, I think, like you said, you were not his type. And I think so that's a very different bond. His family is a very different bond as well, right? It's like that Jekyll and Hyde. You like the nice one, and
it's not even that, him being a sociopath, he got me to like him because I was on to him. I understood what he was doing. He knew exactly what I wanted to hear and he would say it. So I was on to him. It's just that he's a human being. It's like when you travel and you think of some people from some country as being bad or, different. They're not. I was just in South Africa and I was in the middle of, in a safari and talking to people with sign language because we didn't speak the same language. And you realize that they want clean water. They want good food. They want to take care of their families. They want to love their children. They want freedom. They want, safety. And those are things we all want. And so we have this common bond as human beings. I don't care where you're from, who you are, if you're a sociopath, a narcissist, whatever you are, we have a commonality. It is against a normal person's core to want someone to die. Listen, I have a lot of people I don't like in this world, a lot of people who have done me wrong or whatever. I don't want them to die. I may have fantasies about it, but I don't want someone to die, and I certainly don't want to be the one to cause it. And so it was really, he was just a human being.
But it's so deeply rooted in us. What you just said about not wanting someone to die is like I read these. I think we call them historical novels in English, historical novels, and it's always around the 13th, 14th century. For some reason, I'm like obsessed with these times. And there's this, and they're all based on true characters, but there's two characters in there, and they're related. They're aunt and nephew, and they do terrible things to each other. They plot to kill each other. It's kind of comical because these very like wealthy, noble people. But when one of them dies, the other one grieves that the other person is not there anymore, that counterpart, that it's almost like this fun opponent, someone at their level. And but there is something, they actually miss the person that they were hating their whole life. And I think it's definitely deeply rooted in us. Even when you think you hate someone, you actually do not want them dead. And is something that you wrote on page 186, like when you know someone, death is not tolerable. And I wrote in my notes, I said, like, that's how I feel about growing tolerance, is how we build tolerance and grow tolerance in the world is to get to know others. Because when you understand them more, get a glimpse of their souls, or sit in their living room and have a cup of tea or break bread with them, you can hate them because also you get a side of them. And that's what, I know like Daryl Davis, he talks about that too. about how when you know someone, you can't hate them. And it's, yeah, I mean, it is true. There is there is something that you mentioned in your book that I've been wondering about, is that death row inmates are typically not allowed to go outside very often, and many of them choose not to do so for security reasons. They learn to dwell within the walls of their tiny cells, and that's from your book. And I think you wrote that Gacy felt the same, and I always wanted to ask you, what did he fear? Like, was it the other inmates?
Oh, yeah. These were dangerous, psychotic people. In fact, he was stabbed by one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in the hospital for a while. And these people were out of control, and they're in close proximity. And, every prison has petty fights. There are gang issues in these prisons. People fight over cigarettes and food and things like that. And Gacy was a little bit protected because he had some money in his commissary account. He would paint these horrendous, horrible pictures that he would sell, because people would buy that stuff just to say they had something from John Wayne Gacy. And so he had some money in order to fund his account, and he would give people cigarettes and canned goods or whatever. And that was the currency to kind of protect him, because there were some people there who were bigger and stronger and younger and very dangerous. And so, yeah, death row is a very dangerous place.
Yeah.
Very
I mean, you
dangerous.
you definitely had the famous ones in that time when you went to death row. I mean, the stuff that the people that you saw in that bullpen. I have to ask you. I know you talked about the bullpen, but I need to ask you: were they all shackled? Did they all have like handcuffs, or were they just walking freely in there?
They all had handcuffs on, which sounds okay, they're safe, but they're not, because handcuffs can be
You
used
can,
as a, yeah.
exactly.
So, and what was really terrifying to me is that the guards didn't seem very interested in helping anyone. And I think they would have probably just liked to see something happen, to tell you the truth. And I don't know why I got that impression. But they were behind locked doors, and they weren't that attentive to what was going on. And if something were to have happened, I doubt they would have done anything in time.
Yeah, because at any one point there can be like five, six, seven, eight other inmates in there with the visitors. That's a lot of criminals, like on a whole different league of, in a league of their own, if to be in the same room with. So I want to go through sort of a bit more like the reflections. How has your work impacted your worldview?
Hmm. My work on Gacy, or my work as a lawyer, or
Since Gacy, 'cause I think that's probably ongoing, the impact from Gacy, but even just like representing all these other types of clients and
I don't know that that has. I've always been a very empathetic person, and I think this has made me more empathetic. And I've looked more at victims' families. I've looked more at the families of the defendants, and looked at what they're going through, and just kind of looked at everyone at all sides of this. And I've become more and more entrenched in my position against the death penalty. And I try in my book not to preach, because everybody has an opinion on some of these hot button issues, and I'm not going to change anyone's mind ever. But I do feel very strongly about the death penalty, and I think it's going to be out of use soon in the United States, is my prediction, because it's really becoming unpopular. Even prosecutors are not trying to get it. I have seen school shooters who have shot and killed tens, 20 people, and the jury doesn't opt to give them the death penalty for one reason or another. And so I just think that it's going to fall out of favor. And I don't think I've done anything in that process to move that needle any further down the whatever. But I think my worldview is that I'm still very empathetic. I'm still very optimistic that we're going to stop executing people. And I would like to see some of the money that we spend with all these very expensive executions go to, let's prosecute more pedophiles. Let's keep people in jail longer who are dangerous. Let's give money to, areas where we can kind of prevent crime from happening. I mean, there's so much money that we could take from the death penalty and put into prevention and to keeping people in jail longer. And I would be all for that.
yeah, no, it's yeah. I think definitely like keeping definitely getting the actual guilty people behind bars and keeping them there to not hurt other people. That would definitely be, if more money could be used on that, for sure, would be, that would be a great thing. So before I ask you the finishing thoughts that I ask every guest, this the two final questions. Is there anything that you want to share with us that I may not have given you the opportunity to, or I may have interrupted you? Is there anything else that you wanted to say?
Well, the only thing that I think that I would want your listeners to know if they are interested in buying my book and reading it, is that as a woman, I was treated differently throughout this process. And I have also been treated differently throughout my career as a woman. And I give some really serious examples about that and some of the bad treatment that I've had and harassment and how, it almost derailed my career, but that I kind of persevered and got back, on the bike and continued to go forward. And I think it was an important part of my book because it's an important part of my career. And I hope that women or minorities or anyone, or even men, who have, gotten a bad job, a bad boss, bad treatment somewhere, instead of, I say somewhere in my book that it's sort of like getting a pebble in your shoe. You can keep walking even if it hurts, but just don't stop walking or something like that. So,
Yeah.
I hope that people can read that and see that maybe they shouldn't give up their profession or give up their job or give up whatever it is and just deal with the issues as they come. Try not to get bitter. I don't hate being a woman. I love being a woman and I don't want to be a man. But I do recognize that I've been treated differently throughout my entire career, and most of it bad, but some of it good. And some of it, sometimes you can use your gender to your advantage. I think women, can be better listeners. Women can be more better negotiators in some ways. And I think that we should use our skills and our natural inclinations to forward our careers. They're not a detriment, even though some people might want to make them a detriment to you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're definitely like an example of resilience and perseverance. And your example is on a whole different level. I mean, for sure. But that I will let the listeners read in your book. And I definitely recommend it. And yeah. And I think anyone who's listened to this or listened to me before, they know that these topics are highly triggering for me. And so I do not say this lightly when I say that your book is really, really good and has a lot of meaning and it is actually helping me. So
Mhm.
thank you very much. And so here are the final two questions I ask every one of my guests. What life lesson do you wish you learned sooner?
Hmm. I think that one of them would be um, that I wouldn't let what people think of me matter so much. I think as a young woman, I think as women we are sort of raised. We have to look a certain way. We have to have our weight at a certain place. We, have to walk a certain way and dress a certain way. And I have no problem, buying into some of that stuff. But when your whole self-worth is based upon what people think about you, that is when you get into serious trouble because you're always going to have your detractors. You're always going to have people who are envious. You're always going to have people not approve of who you are and what you're doing. And you just have to follow that code, and if you don't know what your code is, you should sit down and really think about it. What is important to you? Is it having a family? Is it making a lot of money? Is it doing things that help your creative side? And to be more purposeful in your life, to try to do the things that you want to do rather than what everyone else thinks you should be doing. And I think that you should remind yourself once a day to think about what it is it's important to you as opposed to everyone else. I wish I would have learned that a little sooner.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is so important. And I've been asking about this question, like it's come up for me, to make sure like, what matters, like, because that is what I mean, that it is so important because you don't, I don't want to get to the end of my life and go, oh no, I went about it the whole wrong way.
Well, we do so many things throughout our day that really don't matter if you think about it. I mean, not to get morbid, but if you had one more day left to live, would you be upset if the your meal didn't turn out, or your coffee wasn't made the right way, or your hair didn't turn out. I mean, all those things in the grand scheme are really irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the second question is, Karen, is what do you not put up with anymore?
I don't put up with people around me who aren't helping me and supportive of me. Yeah, I think that if you don't have people in your life who have your back, and you don't have anything. And I see people in marriages, and I see people in friendships, or even with your family sometimes, where it's toxic, and they are not only not helping you, they're hurting you. And I think that it's important to have only good people around you. And if that means that you have fewer friends or fewer, times out during the week, wasting time with people who are hard on you or difficult or envious. And I'm finding out a lot of things. When you're down, sometimes those people come out of the woodwork because they want to pretend like they're supporting you. But what they really do is they're reveling in seeing you down. And you have to recognize that. And then when you have success, like I'm having some success with this book, and I see people who are very envious and who are kind of acting in a way that is counter to how they should be acting. And if you have those people around you, just weed them out. Weed them out now, weed them out gently, and be done with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know if you find this, but like when you do see like when people are around you and they resent you and you had no idea, you didn't even know what you did. And but that energy is like, is so, so bad for you. And it's just not, and that's not someone that you can trust when they're like that. Because they're
Nope.
going, the first opportunity they have, they will betray you and they will do it over and over again. So yeah, you have to, yeah, definitely
You know
empty
what?
the room a
If
bit.
your people around you should be happy when you're happy, and they should want to attach themselves to happy people and successful people, and not feel that my success or my happiness takes away anything from them.
No, 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 no. Yeah, that's definitely, yeah, you don't want that. Don't want people like that for sure. And then when you are down, they're not reveling, but they actually want to, they will give you I find like the ones that are giving you the hard truth that you may not want to hear. Those are the ones you're like, oh, actually, you do have my back. Because yeah, I was probably not acting in my best interest there. And you told me, even though you knew I didn't want to hear it,
Sure.
it takes guts for someone to do that. So yeah. So Karen, please tell us, where can we find your book? Where can we find out more about you? Give us all the good stuff.
Sure. My book is called Killing Time with John Wayne Gacy, Defending America's Most Evil Serial Killer on Death Row. And you can get it on Amazon. You can get it at good bookstores, Walmart, Books A Million. The best place to find out about me is my website, which is KarenConti.com, KarenConti. I do a radio show in Chicago. You can Google Karen Conti Radio, and you can hear some of my podcasted segments. It's a live radio show. And, I've got YouTube videos, and I'm on Facebook, Karen Conti 23. You can connect with me. And if there are speaking engagements that you'd like me to do, I'm happy to do that. I do some virtual book clubs and all of that, because it is really, I think, a good book to discuss, because there are a number of different topics, not just serial killers, but the death
Yeah.
penalty, women, careers, those types of things. And I would love to be involved with those.
Oh, I didn't know there was a book club. Yeah, because there's tons of topics in there that, there's lots of things that we did not cover just because, there isn't time. And also I want people to read your book, but, you know, and it's something that I'm just going to say this is that like, I don't know if I don't know if I'm crossing a line here, but I feel like you're someone who is like really good with relationship, the way you talk about marriage and partnership. And yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you've had that in your life, because obviously it's not an easy career that you've chosen. So so yeah, I mean, I don't know if that comes up in your book club, but yeah, I think yeah.
I've been very
I'm sure
fortunate.
people could learn a lot
Well, thank
from
you.
that.
I've been very fortunate to have some good people around me.
Hmm.
I've
Yeah.
chosen wisely, but I've also had some good people who really helped me and mentor me and loved me. And so you can't discount that as part of your success.
No, for sure, for sure. Karen Conti, thank you so much.
Thank you for
the
having
time
me. I
you've
really
given us
enjoyed
today.
our talk. Thank you, Angie. And thank you for reading my book.
Thank you so much. A real honor to have you on, Karen.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. And that's our episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. It can be a screenshot that you text them, a link, the name of it, any of those will do. If you give a 5-star rating and a review, that really, really helps the algorithm for it to be shared on all the different platforms. And just a little note, please be aware that this podcast is always free to listen to. Any platforms that want to charge you for it are doing so without my consent, okay? This is free. You can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, all of the other regular listening platforms that don't charge you. This is free. So don't let someone charge you to listen to my podcast. Until next time.
Using health inappropriately.